News of the Times. The case of Mary Maguire, the Ripper, and Carrie Brown. Welcome to News of the Times. In today's case, we look at the claim of a 70-year-old woman who has been admitted to an Irish workhouse and that she met Jack the Ripper face to face immediately after the Annie Chapman killing. She describes a foreign type of man who travels to places such as America. We follow this theory with a case that takes place in New York in 1891 that the papers claimed was an exactly reminiscent of the Ripper murders in London. We take a look at both the connected stories and ponder the question if the New York police succeeded where Whitechapel police failed. And in today's short end of episode for the particular story from 1825, we take a look at what can happen if one messes with cats. We hope you enjoy the show. Background. It's hard to describe the breadth of the impact of the Ripper murders in England. Papers were daily filled with a story, speculations, claims, and potential alleged victims, all related to the horrific killings of Jack the Ripper. More than one claimant came forward to give evidence of supposed contact with the Ripper, and the police were inundated in attempting to sift through the facts from fiction. Mary Maguire. In 1926, 70-year-old Mary Maguire, who has just been placed in a workhouse, comes forward with her own tale that made the papers of the time. She states that she worked in the Whitechapel area around the same time as the Ripper murders, and continues that she met a foreigner on the night after the murder of Annie Chapman. From the People, the 2nd of May, 1926, woman who met Jack the Ripper, maniacs chat after murder. Mary Maguire, who at the age of 70 has just been admitted to an Irish workhouse, is the only woman who is able to claim that she is the only woman who has met the terrible Jack the Ripper, talked with him, and lived to tell the tale. It was 40 years ago that the encounter took place, within a few minutes of the commission of one of his most atrocious of the long series of crimes associated with this most sinister figure. Mary Maguire, then employed in the household of a doctor practicing in the East End of London, happened to be in the neighbourhood of Hanbury Street, awaiting the coming of a countrywoman who was employed as a nurse nearby. A stifled scream. Shortly afterwards, she heard something like a stifled scream come from the court, but as nothing further was heard, she paid no attention to the sound. A few minutes later, a man came out of the court and stopped dead in front of Miss Maguire. "Where have I seen you before?" he said, peering intently into the face of the waiting woman. "I know," he went on, "you're one of the maids with Dr. Fitzgerald." As this was the case, Mary Maguire assumed that the man was attached to one of the hospitals in the district and had seen her at the house of the doctor. He stood talking, and finally he walked to the end of the street with Mary, pressing her to have refreshment with him at a neighbouring hotel. She declined, in spite of his insistence, but with the idea of getting rid of him the more easily, she promised to meet him the following night at Liverpool Street Station. When she returned to the spot where she had first seen him, she was joined by her friend, and she thought no more of the matter until the following morning, when her employer mentioned the details of the latest Ripper crime. Victim identified. Recalling the facts of the night before, Mary Maguire was taken to the mortuary, and there she identified the victim as the woman she had seen in the company of the man who had spoken to her shortly after she had heard the scream. Her description of the man. Mary Maguire's description of the man was as follows. medium height, dark skin, coal black hair, regular features with a rather prominent nose and cheekbones, speech of an educated man, but with just the least touch of a foreign accent. From remarks he made to her, she was certain that the man had travelled a good deal and at one time had lived in Enniscorthy in County Wexford. He also mentioned visits to America, France, and Spain, but he declined to say anything of his own nationality. His dress was in keeping with his speech and manners, and certain other facts led the girl to think that the man was a doctor, or else a medical student attached to one of the hospitals in the district. Cool and self-possessed. At that time, students and doctors were in the habit of calling at intervals on her employer, and the fact that he recognized her as having been met there strengthened this notion. The strangest thing about the man was that, although he had obviously come from the commission of an atrocious crime, he was perfectly cool and self-possessed, and he did not appear at all anxious to get away from the scene of the murder. No reason to like women. In the course of their conversation, he made a remark to Mary Maguire that may explain the motives of his many crimes. I have no particular reason to like women, he said. On the contrary, I ought to be a woman hater, for one of your sex did me an injury that has influenced my life since then, I like to think. As he said this, Mary Maguire observed the man's eyes for the first time, and she could not help but be struck by the strange gleam in them. The gleam of the madhouse, she called it, and it was this circumstance that caused her to try to get rid of him, for the sinister reputation of the neighbourhood came into her mind, and she was nervous about the persistence of the man. There hasn't been one for some time now, he said to her, but don't be surprised if you hear of one, or perhaps more at any time, because I am told Jack is about again. The police won't catch him. When Mary Maguire expressed a hope that the police would catch the monster, her companion laughed and added, I don't think there is a policeman born that can catch him, for not only is he clever, but he is so placed that suspicion cannot fall on him. The police are more likely to call him in to help them when the bodies are found. She kept the appointment. On the instructions of the police, Mary kept the appointment for the night after her meeting with the man, but her mysterious acquaintance was not there. The line of inquiries of her disclosures suggested to the police was followed up, and the subsequent discoveries strengthened the view that the actual culprit was, as she had thought, employed at one of the hospitals in the district. An identification lineup. The description she gave tallied with the details of two men, one of whom possessed a foreign degree and was regularly allowed access to the operating theatres of two hospitals in the district. This man was watched for some time, and finally it was arranged that Mary Maguire should have an opportunity of identifying him in the company of others. This she failed to do, although she expressed the opinion that a man whose position in the group she indicated was very like the one that spoke to her on the night of the crime. He sailed for America and was kept under the observation in hope that he would give himself away, but expectations did not materialize, and he finally left the country for America. It is a strange coincidence that shortly after his departure, Ripper crimes were reported from New York and from other places abroad to which he was thought to have gone, but from that day to this, all traces of the man have been lost. It is hard to say what reason Mary, at age 70, would have for recounting this tale regarding the Ripper from long, long ago. Mary does not explain why she had decided to resurrect such an old story. As for the claim that the foreign gentleman sailed to America with only a little digging, this story from 1891 would seem to add some indirect credence to Mary's story. About Carrie Brown. Carrie Brown was born in 1834 and she was a prostitute living in New York. We do not have the details of Carrie's background and what had led her to the dangerous life of a prostitute, but we do know that she had some education. Her party trick during drinking games was to quote Shakespeare, thereby giving her the appellation of Old Shakespeare amongst the locals. In April 1891, in a filthy, impoverished room at the East River Hotel, Carrie Brown was discovered, murdered, and mutilated, the mutilation taking the form of disembowelment. Noting the similarities with Whitechapel's Jack the Ripper, the American press themselves wondered if Jack had emigrated to New York. From the New York Commercial Advertiser, the 29th of April, 1891. She was of the same class and was slain in the same manner as the Whitechapel victims. The unfortunate creature was strangled and disemboweled. The strong probability that London's fiend in human form, Jack the Ripper, has transferred his field of operations from Whitechapel to the slums of New York has sent a thrill of horror through the metropolis. The slaughter of the woman Carrie Brown, or Shakespeare as she was familiarly known, in a squalid room on the 4th floor of the East River House, a disreputable dive on the corner of Water and Catherine Street, in many particulars closely resembles the work of the Whitechapel fiend, and the police are strongly of the opinion that he really is in New York. The main difference which this crime presents from the London butcheries lies in the fact that the New York victim was strangled, and whereas the murderer's work in London was invariably begun by cutting of the throat. A handsome woman. She was a handsome woman with striking features of a Roman cast and a form of remarkable symmetry for a woman of her age. There are even traces of refinement visible beneath the marks left by a life of dissipation. The House of All Drinks. The place in which the woman's life was ended is known to the residents in the locality as the House of All Drinks. It has a bad reputation and is perhaps one of the worst in its class in the city. The story of the murder. The story of the murder in detail is as follows. On Thursday night, amongst the other unfortunates who came to the hotel, was an old woman, grey, not bent. She was dressed in blue checked gingham and carried a little red calico bag with her handkerchief and 2 pairs of spectacles. She must have been 60. Her hair was so nearly white. With her was Mamie Healy, a poor sodden wretch. They had a glass of beer, the 2 women, and then Mammy Healy, with her rags and her drunkenness, went out into the wet street. For fear she would go to sleep, old Shakespeare, with her little red bag and her thin, wizened, painted cheeks, wandered forth too into the rain. It was 11 o'clock when the bell of the hotel door rang. Mary Miniter answered it. The old woman was there again and had a man with her. She wanted mixed ale. The man asked for a 50-cent room and gave his name as C. Nicolai and said Shakespeare was his wife. Oh, said the old woman with a coaxing look at the man, can't I have some beer? He never spoke, just nodded his head and took out his pocketbook and threw from it 10 cents. Beer or mixed ale? Asked Mary Miniter as she took the dime. Mixed ale, answered Shakespeare. Mary Miniter went to the bar, got a pail of mixed ale, brought it back, and handed it to the old woman. And C. Nikolai and wife went up the narrow, uneven stairs, 4 flights, and Mary Miniter said good night and went about her business. The night at the East River Hotel passed much as most nights do there. It is doubtful if the place is ever closed. When morning came, the front door was opened, and at 9 o'clock the housekeeper asked Eddie Fitzgerald to go up and clear the rooms. It was a horrible sight. When he reached the 5th floor, Fitzgerald came to 31, the corner room. To the left of the door, against the wall, stood the bed. The door opened against it, and Fitzgerald had to push the door width and to get into the centre of the room before his sight fell upon the bed. There, nude from feet to breast, lay old Shakespeare. Above the shoulders, only a confused mass of clothing, and the bedclothes tumbled over against the wall. The woman's feet were toward the door. She lay at the outer edge of the bed, but her head was on the centre of the pillow. There was blood on everything. Blood on the sheets, quilts, bedstead, and floor, smeared in finger marks upon the limbs, which were still shapely despite her age. The body was twisted, the left leg crossed above the right, under which lay the entrails at the woman, to which the butcher in his frenzy had clawed out. Both shoulders lay flat upon the bed, and it seemed as though the murderer had twisted the limbs over towards the wall in furtherance of his awful object. He fled with a scream. The right arm was under the woman, and the skinny hand reached out as if clutching at something beyond the sideboard of the bed. Beneath the right thigh was thrust the knife with which the murder had been done, the bloody handle projecting. The whole horrible picture stuck upon the sensitive palate of little Fitzgerald's intelligence in a second, and with a scream he fled down the long hallway. There was no more business done in the East River Hotel yesterday. Please take charge. A man ran to the police station in Oak Street, whence Captain O'Connor sent detectives Doran and Griffin. Then the message went to headquarters. Inspector Burns ordered detectives Crowley and Grady to the place, and by 10:30 the hotel was under police care. He had carved a cross. Coroner Schultz was soon at the scene. Around the murdered woman's head was a tightly wrapped an old white cotton skirt. When Coroner Schultz took that off, he discovered the old, hard, gin-stained face drawn into a look of intense pain, the dishevelled grey hair hanging down the back, and the throat showing the purple marks of fingers that had clutched it. The woman had been strangled to death. Then had followed the mutilation which connected the crime with Jack the Ripper's handicraft. Beginning near the end of the spine, the murderer had cut deeply frontwards to a point on the lower part of the abdomen, and then back again to where he started. What he had cut away had disappeared. He must have taken it with him. There was no sign of it in the room. Disemboweling had followed this awful surgery. This completed, the murderer had left his mark on the body. On the back of the left hip, in jagged lines more than a foot long, he had scored a rude cross. On the door, the murderer had made his mark again. The boards which formed the wall bore such a cross as he had cut on the body, scratched in with the point of a knife. Of the other man's attire there was no trace in the room. The murderer gone. Gone the murderer was, and no one in the hotel saw him go, so far as the police could find out. But this would be comparatively easy if he could walk the rattling floors and creaking stained stairs softly enough not to attract attention. Inspector Burns at work. Inspector Burns put his best man on the case. They showed remarkable activity and followed clue after clue in the hope of getting at something tangible. An arrest made. The first important arrest in the case was made at 9:30 last night. Detectives Crowley and O'Brien, who had been looking all day for a man called Frenchy, came across him in Water Street and took him to the nearest station house. Frenchy is a tall fellow with a long, slim nose and looks like a Greek. He knew the murdered woman. The police are still turning heaven and earth to catch New York's Jack the Ripper. Arrests have been made by wholesale in the case, and the police and detective forces have spent most of their time since the murder of the woman Shakespeare, or Carrie Brown, to hunting Jack the Ripper. Arrests had been made, and at 8 o'clock yesterday afternoon, the inspector boarded the red D-Line steamer Philadelphia, lying at the pier in the East River, and personally arrested the second engineer, who answers almost perfectly to the description of the murderer as given by Mary Miniter, the housekeeper of the East River Hotel. Still another arrest had been made that tallies with the description the supposed Jack the Ripper. 2 park policemen found a man in City Hall Park. He wore a sand-coloured coat and blue trousers, and, if anything, was scarcely shabby enough for the companion of the degraded victim at the slum lodging house that fatal night. They know the murderer. Inspector Burns said he knows who the murderer is. Frenchy is one of the first suspects arrested and has a disreputable cousin, and it is this cousin whom the police believe is New York's Ripper. The women among the prisoners had often been in the company of both of the men. They said that the two of them were usually travelling together, but when one of them appeared alone, he generally went about inquiring for the other, with whom he designated as his cousin. It appears from the statements the women had made that the cousins had frequently gone with them to the East River Hotel. On the night of the murder, Frenchy occupied alone room 33, which was across the hall from the room where the murder was committed. When the inspector heard the woman's story, he sent again for Mammy Miniter, the woman who let the couple into the hotel that night, and she recalled the fact that Frenchy was in the house that night and said she recognized the man who came in with the murdered woman as Frenchy's cousin. With the papers all publicly announcing the belief of the connection between the New York murder and the unsolved Jack murders of London, pressure was on the police. The pressure was further amplified by many boasts 3 years prior that if they, the New York police, had been involved in the investigation of the Ripper cases, they would have solved it. From the Philadelphia Times, 27th of April, 1891. The Ripper identified. Inspector Burns satisfied that he knows the murderer, his whereabouts unknown. The Ripper identified. An Algerian known only as Frenchy, number 2 among the outcasts of New York's slums, proved positively to have been old Shakespeare's companion on the night that she was murdered. Frenchy number 2, the Greek, is doubtless New York's Jack the Ripper. Inspector Burns is confident on this point, and he combined Central Office detective forces of Brooklyn and New York, and they are scouring the streets of the two cities in search of the murderer. Today, new evidence was discovered which settled the identity of the murderer. Although the man had been in the country only a few months, which makes the theory that he may have had some connection with the Whitechapel crimes not a mere impression formed on the similarity of the crimes, he is pretty well known to the habituates of the Cherry Hill district. He accosted Carrie Brown. On the night of the murder, he was seen to accost old Shakespeare, the victim, on the corner of Jamaica and Cherry Streets. This was about 8 o'clock. An hour later, they were in Greek George's place on Oliver Street, where they ate oysters and drank several bumpers of beer. A quarrel arose in the place between the couple, and they left on a suggestion from the management. Frenchie number 2 had threatened Carrie Brown with a clubbing. Outside, however, they patched up a truce, it would appear, for when they entered another establishment a block away, they were very peaceable. Here they drank more beer and became noisy. After a time, Mrs. Finnegan, the proprietress of the place, who is a fearless Irish woman with a muscular right arm, ordered them to take their departure. They demurred, and a baseball bat expertly wielded was brought into play. An hour later, they entered the East River Hotel with the ghastly result that has already been related. The murderer's movements traced. How Frenchie made his exit from the hotel without notice is still puzzling the police. Today, however, it was learned that he appeared at his lodgings on Myrtle Avenue in Brooklyn at 6 o'clock on Friday morning, the morning after the murder, changed his clothes and disappeared. He was a cobbler by trade and kept his tools at his lodging place. Frenchie is an Algerian by birth and is as tough a man from all descriptions as could be imagined. He was introduced to the Cherry Hill by his cousin and has been seen often in the vicinity. He was in the company with another of the crew of roughed outcasts, Dublin Mary, on Monday night last. Mary Miniter, the housekeeper of the East River Hotel, is still detained at police headquarters. Her description of Frenchie is most accurate. His capture hourly expected. Inspector Burns stated tonight that the murderer would be captured before many hours had passed. He does not think it is possible that he has shipped on any outgoing vessel or vessels sailing under the last few days, and he had been closely watched by the detectives. It wasn't possible for a man to sail as a first or second class passenger, as he was known to have little or no money. He is believed to be hiding in Brooklyn or to have taken refuge as a farmhand down on Long Island. Inspector Burns declines to accept the theory that Frenchie is connected with the Whitechapel crimes. He offers no explanations to the fact, however, that Frenchie has been in this country for a period which corresponds with the interval between the last butchery in Whitechapel and the almost similar murder in New York. As he has already stated, a portion of the woman's anatomy is missing, and that this detail was noticeable in the London crimes is regarded as significant by those who adhere to the belief that some connection between the crimes will be established. The body of the woman will be buried tomorrow. Police feel confident that they have their man from a preponderance of gathered evidence. They do not, however, wish to comment on a possible tie between him and the London Ripper murders. From the Philadelphia Inquiry, the 1st of May, 1891, New York Ripper Court. Old Carrie Brown's murder fastened by the police on Frenchie. Bloodstains found on his clothing, body, and in his room. He entered her room after her companion had gone and in a fit of rage or jealousy strangled and slashed her. The police authorities have finally decided upon Frank Sherlick, or Frenchy as he is known in the low haunts of the Fourth Ward, as the murderer of the unfortunate old woman, Carrie Brown, who was found brutally butchered in room 31 of the East River Hotel on Catherine Street last Friday morning. Frenchy was arrested on Friday night by detectives Dorian and Griffin of the Oak Street station, and he has been in custody ever since, while Inspector Burns and his men have been weaving a strong chain of circumstantial evidence against him. The facts upon which Frenchy is charged with the murder are practically the following. A trail of blood. Shortly after 10 o'clock on Thursday night, Frenchy hired room 33 on the top floor of the East River Hotel, diagonally across the hall from room 31, in which the body of the murdered woman was afterwards found. The woman came to the hotel about 11 o'clock with an unknown man as a companion. They were shown to room 31, but it is now known that the man remained there only a short time. He was seen to leave the hotel before midnight. When the detectives early last Friday morning were called in to examine the room where the murdered woman lay, they found blood spots leading toward the door. These were carefully followed. They led across the hall and into a room numbered 33. The detectives continued their examination and found more bloodstains on a chair, on a blanket, and on bed ticking. That was evidence enough. When the prisoner was searched at the station house, the police found that the lower half of his flannel shirt was fearfully bloody. On his shoulder was a blood stain which looked as if it had been made by the laying on of a bloody hand. Even his socks were bloody. His hand showed traces of the stain, but they had been washed. When human blood gets under the fingernails, it's impossible to clean it all out. So Inspector Burns had the space under Frenchy's fingernails scraped out. Chemistry to the rescue. Here is where the medical man becomes a valuable aid. He examined the scrapings for blood corpuscles, and what is more, he found them. This was Monday. By this time, the police were feeling pretty confident, but they were looking for the man who went upstairs with Carrie Brown. A man of vile habits. Frenchy was a man whose habits were so vile that even the depraved and sodden wretches of the Fourth Ward slums refused to have anything to do with him. He was a brute, and Inspector Burns said he hasn't the brains of a monkey. He would bite a woman as a dog would bite a piece of meat. That was his character. How the murder was committed. The man who went to room 31 with Carrie Brown went out before 12 o'clock. After he was gone, Frenchy crossed the hall. It was only a step to the other room. What passed between them is a mystery still, for now Frenchy has relapsed into a state of silence and by signs announces that he can neither speak nor understand English. When he left, there was a dead body on the bed and the blood was soaking through the mattress upon which it lay, down through the slats and to the floor where it made little stagnant pools. How the woman was killed is well known. The vicious brute slashed her and left her dead. It is hard to tell how or when he got out of the hotel, but when he did leave, he seems to have made no attempt to run away. He remained in the neighbourhood and was caught only a few blocks from the hotel. His opposing statements. He was questioned closely and asked to account for the blood on his clothing. He first started off in a rambling story of how he had gone to Jamaica Street with a woman. He said he had been locked up in the jail at Long Island City upon his release and had got the blood on himself accidentally. He told many stories, in every one of which women were figured. All the stories were investigated. Some of them were partly true, and some of them were beautiful specimens of a fertile imagination. As far as the stories of the blood were concerned, they were all false, and there was but one conclusion to arrive at. It was that he had killed the woman. The blood found upon him was subjected to microscopic examination and found to be human blood. There could be no doubt on that point. That is the outline of the story, said the doctor who told it. Inspector Burns, to my mind, is the greatest detective that ever lived. He has worked unceasingly night and day on this theory since the murder was found out, and the way in which he has ferreted out and followed every straw that pointed away to the end is something simply marvellous. Out of a muddle of utter confusion, without bottom or any single apparent fact to it, he has shaped in my sight an awful arraignment of the murderer which he can never escape. Inspector Burns' corroboration. Inspector Burns, at first reticent about the matter, finally admitted, "We have had the man under arrest from the first. He found blood upon his clothes and elsewhere, and the two physicians of the health department have worked with us off and on for 3 days, trying to establish by microscopical test whether it was human blood or not. It was human blood. That is all I can tell you. The facts will come out in full at the inquest." No confession. And has your prisoner made a confession? The inspector evaded a direct answer. "I haven't had a conversation with him for enough of that," he said. His name was believed to be Frank Sherlick. Frenchy's correct name, as far as it is known, is Frank Sherlick, and he is said to be a Greek by birth. He speaks very little English and is well known of his character in the vicinity of the hotel where the crime was committed. He has always been considered as a dangerous man, and the women who frequent the low saloons and dance halls in the Fourth Ward have always been in dread of his ferocious temper. Given an attorney. With Frenchy now being charged with the crime, he was appointed attorney to represent him, and, as the Brooklyn Daily Eagle reported on Sunday, May the 3rd, 1891, that attorney was somewhat dismissive of the police's case. The defence of Frenchy number 1. His lawyer's opinion. After Mr. Friend had devoted much time to the prisoner yesterday, he said to an eager reporter, "It would be ready to go to trial on Monday morning. The case against this man is very weak. In fact, I cannot see that they have made out any case against him at all." The witnesses, Inspector Byrne had told several stories, and it seemed that they have at last hit upon a story which makes it appear that this unfortunate man is guilty. How will they appear when placed on the witness stand and are subjected to cross-examination? 2 criminals say that Frenchy once had a knife like the one in the room in which the old woman was found murdered, and all the other witnesses are reported to have told various stories. Carrie Brown's early life. Undertaker Smith of Salem, Massachusetts, wrote some details of Carrie Brown's early life to Deputy Coroner Jenkins yesterday. The new points in his letter were the statements that she was a 56-year-old, was born in England of Danish parents who were John and Mary Montgomery. She left her husband 15 years ago. From the Rochester Daily Republican, the 4th of May, 1891. Frenchy objects to being called a ripper. Frenchy, the man indicted by Inspector Burns, announced discoveries to be the murderer of Carrie Brown, talked today about the charges against him for the first time, and when seen, vehemently protested his innocence. He says that when he arrived in New York 8 months ago, he got work or begged wherever he could and lived in Brooklyn. He admitted that on the night of the murder, he passed the night in the East River Hotel, but he protested his innocence of the murder of Shakespeare. His lawyer said that from his observations, he did not believe that Frenchy was an idiot, a maniac, or a desperate criminal. His firm intended to see that the man had all his rights. They were somewhat hampered so far by inability to communicate freely with the prisoner. His name was Amir Ben Ali. By mid-May 1891, it had been discovered that the accused's name was in fact Amir Ben Ali, and it was under this name he was indicted for murder in the first degree on Monday the 18th, 1891. Found guilty. At his subsequent trial, he was found guilty of the murder of Carrie Brown and was sentenced to life in prison. Further particulars. This strange tale comes from 1825. Don't mess with cats would seem to be a regular theme of the day. From Bell's Life in London, the 27th of February, 1825. On Tuesday, an elderly lady made her appearance in the office with the countenance of the greatest solemnity, advancing towards the presiding magistrate, Sergeant Sellon. After a pause of a few minutes, she proceeded as follows. Please, your worship, may I speak? Sergeant Sellon said, Certainly, madam. Then, sir, you must know that some months ago I took lodgings in the neighbourhood of Burton Crescent, and being a single lady, here she heaved a deep sigh, I begged of Mrs. Cooper, a particular friend of mine, to let me have a kitten. This kitten, please your worship, I reared from its infancy, and as if it were my only child. It partook of everything the same as myself, and in due time grew to be a fine cat. Unfortunately for me, you'll excuse me, your worship, a tomcat. The lodgers, having discovered the sex of the cat, considered it a reflection of a maiden lady to keep such a one, and the consequence was that both in the house and the street everybody pointed to me and said, How is the tomcat? In fact, your worship, I was literally worried. The lady resumed, Well, sir, they were not satisfied with this conduct, but they took an opportunity of spiriting away my cat and murdering it. Murdering it in the most inhuman manner. Was that not shocking, sir? Sergeant Sellon, most shocking indeed, but what do you wish me to do? Is it to bring it to life again? The old lady continues, Oh, by no means, but since it's murder, the lodgers complain that the house is haunted by its ghost, and that they cannot sleep a wink from the noise which it makes, caterwauling. I certainly frequently hear a scraping at my bedroom door at night, and a mewing, and I believe the dear old cat loved me so, that could be he had come to see me. He would, but for my peace on earth, until I leave my present lodgings, I wish he would stay away. Sergeant Sellon, this is certainly, madam, a subject of great importance, so important that I do not feel myself competent to give any advice or to give any decision. I will, however, take a week to consider, during which time I beg that you will keep yourself tranquil and not to think on the tomcat, and by that time I may probably, by some spell, be enabled to bury his ghost. We have no further information on the ghostly cat, but reckon it had to be a cautionary tale if anyone interferes with a cat's usual 9 lives. That concludes this episode of Mary Maguire, the Ripper, and Carrie Brown. We really hope you enjoyed the show. If you did enjoy the show, we would be very much appreciative of a thumbs up or a share of the video with friends. Your comments, subscriptions, likes, and shares all really hope to support the channel by telling YouTube and its imponderable algorithm to promote the channel to others. Thank you so much for your very kind support. This has been News of the Times, and I am Robin Coles.